Lovecraft seems to be coming back into vogue, with many different types of games taking on the setting of what it's like to be a feeble mortal in the presence of old gods. But that's just the problem, isn't it? You're not a feeble mortal in those games. In Bloodborne, you're driving your bare hand into these monstrosities and tearing a new asshole on top of the many they already have. Other games like Call of Cthulhu and, Call of Cthulhu put you in the shoes of an ordinary guy, but by the end of it you're zapping Hydra with a railgun. So that's the problem. A Lovecraft game can't really be faithful if the humans come out on top. So that's where Sea Salt comes in. Now the roles are reversed, and you are the ones controlling unmentionable horrors and ripping people limb from limb. So, the game starts like all good love stories do, with a priest beseeching his god. After spending his life cultivating a religion to an old one, he for some reason is shocked that the deal he made wasn't entirely fair. The god asks for the priest to give his life, but the priest refuses. We now take control of the old one in order to get what is owed to us. I really like the aesthetics of the game, but I can understand why some people would be tired of another pixel indie game. But there are a lot of details that make the game nice to look at. Stuff like fog covering a level, leaves blowing through the wind, to the blood of your enemies splashing onto the screen. Levels are filled with little details and items that your monsters can interact with. I also really like the artwork of the game, and the tarot card idea for the monsters when you summon them. It's like playing a more grounded and sensible version of Yu-Gi-Oh! At the main menu, you even have a book of lore that describes all the enemies and creatures. It helps give a little more personality to the 5x3 sprites on the screen when you know they came from a hermaphroditic parasite. The environments themselves are visually nice. Buildings can look a little flat at times, but there is a big variety in locations. You'll go from the city's port, through a forest, the farming areas, and into the city itself. Also environmental details like clothes on the line, caught sharks, cutting through the wheat fields to the hung up bodies of cult leaders are a nice touch. This was definitely the right decision graphically for the tone the game wants to present. I don't know how much I would enjoy seeing a realistic version of a mother abandoning her child to a swarm of insects, only to be eaten herself. Gotta keep the game child-friendly enough for the Russian kids to play. You start out in a ruin on an island with a bunch of small monsters. You can move them with the analog stick, but not in the way you think. See the little evil spotlight? You control that, and your minions follow where it goes. With the best of their abilities, of course. When you see something you want the little guys to munch on, you place the spotlight on the target and press the eat button. You want to time your attack, however. Just pressing it before your monsters are on them will mean you can't catch up. You have to swarm, outmaneuver, and surround your target before you go and eat them alive. I would say it's a more messed up version of Pikmin, but that game's pretty hard to beat in brutality. As you progress, you unlock more and more horrid creatures like walking organs, fishmen, liches, and crabs. To summon them, there are two options. One, you can come across a summoning sigil and make your choice there, or you can gather enough coin from civilians you've eaten to buy a creature at any time. This creates a fun risk-reward, as you can hold onto this until you're in a tight spot, but you won't be able to pick up any more money as your fishmen pockets are filled with blood money. As the game starts off, you'll feel invincible and very easily be able to swarm most enemies without losing too many monsters. There are a few bosses and enemies that teach that sometimes it's best to hang back and wait for the opportunity, but I was able to brute force my way through most areas and bosses with my favourite combination, cultists and crabs. About halfway through I had to rethink my strategy as my cultists started to get lit up like it was the Battle of the Somme. Each creature you can summon has 5 basic stats, and most of them are pretty self-explanatory: health, attack, speed, amount, and horror. Horror is a bit of an abstract concept, so let me explain. The more horrific a creature is, the less likely an enemy will attack them. You can have a single fishman standing in the middle of the road, and simple peasants won't want to mess with it. A guard might think he can take it on, but if you bring in some friends, he'll run away screaming. That's the interesting thing about the horror stat. It's that it's constantly fluctuating depending on the situation. Some enemies are unaffected by horror, like dogs, manned weapons, or hunters, so walking into town with a school of fishmen can only get you so far. At the beginning of a level, you are given a choice of apostles to choose from. You only get to pick one from the beginning, but you can unlock the others in no time by completing specific objectives. Different apostles give you different effects, like an increase in the monsters summoned, to being able to use altars in levels to sacrifice cultists to summon an overpowered unit. You kill all the enemies in an area, you get to progress. You always have the option to restart the area you're in, so if you take too many casualties, you may want to consider it. Restarting a level early can mean not winding up with a single fishman running around towards the end of the stage. Moments like this can be pretty frustrating, and can show you some of the pathing issues the game has. The monsters can get stuck on buildings, other enemies are outside the stage entirely, although that only happened once. I fully admit that it was my fault getting into this predicament, but I was eventually able to get through it. Intentional or not, when you are deep in a level with loads of strong enemies but only a few units, you start developing strategies and plans similar to a slasher movie, luring people around corners and ambushing them, and gunning directly into the town square is a quick way to get torched by a flamethrower, so sticking to dark back alleys makes sense for the creatures you're controlling. To fill these environments, there is a great number of enemies and obstacles. You have more standard fodder like peasants with pitchforks and molotovs. Some are just pallet swaps, as the butchers with meat cleavers essentially act the same way as pitchfork guys, but it's nice that devs were thinking about populating the game with lots of varied sprites to make the game seem more populated. Later on, more tougher enemies appear, like archers, if only because they've run away from you, and knights and city guards. With enemies that have projectile, you get a little marker that denotes where it will land, but because you're focusing on so much and your unit's movement can be a little erratic, it still remains a challenge to avoid them. But the enemy that give you the most trouble are the hunters. Hunters are like straight out of Bloodborne. They are designed to kill eldritch horrors and do so with prejudice. These guys can't be scared and are equipped with devastating weapons like shotguns and katanas and flamethrowers. And the enemy can become quite devious later in the game, setting traps around summoning stones to even using civilians as bait and luring you in an ambush. I always felt like the placement of the enemies made sense, like they were actually defending the city from an incoming invasion. But guys, did you really need to give them machine gun nests? Every stage concludes with a boss. Each one has a different gimmick that will test your control over your army. It's a nice change of pace, focusing on one enemy that has a pattern to learn in a fairly large area. It starts out simple with bosses that require you to dodge projectile or know when to back off so that your guys don't all get slaughtered. Later on, bosses will incorporate all these strategies in one fight, but some are a bit more gimmicky, like the flame leaders that just chuck a huge load of enemies at you, or the witch fight where you choose whether or not to fight her. After you've defeated them, they get ripped apart. No, it's actually you that rips them apart, as the tentacles come from inside the screen. Sea Salt has a nice amount of content to incentivize multiple playthroughs. The game is around 3 hours long, but that's only one route. There are multiple times during the story where paths will diverge, and you can choose where to go. These paths offer new levels to explore, new bosses to fight against, and even new monster cards. Separate from the main mode, there are arena challenges where you are placed into a zone and waves of enemies spawn for you to take down. Also, after beating the game, a hard mode is unlocked, and you are able to start a new game with all your unlocks intact. So that's Sea Salt. For someone like me who isn't very good at real-time strategies, it was an enjoyable time. The game still has enough strategy and dexterity for it to be fun whether you lean more on the action side or the strategy side of things. You have to be smart and plan out how you are going to take down your enemies. If this looks interesting, or if you're a fan of the source material, here his only visible servants, farmers, and caretakers were a sullen pair of aged Narragansett Indians, the husband dumb and curiously scarred, and the wife of a very repulsive cast of countenance, probably due to a mixture of whoa! I would definitely recommend the game. If you're still on the fence, there is an early demo build of the game, but be aware it's missing some features, and it's just an example of how the gameplay works.